different job was
Before the next clock,
I mean, yeah, go for it.
we're going to call to order our Transportation Policy Board, and so glad to have everyone here. Thank you for attending today. At this time, we're looking for approval of our minutes from the last meeting. Do I have a motion? Motion and second on that. Anybody have any comments on the minutes, any changes that need to be made, or have you all had a chance to review them? All right, I'm going to assume that you have, and so we're going to take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. Next up is public comment. We'll open up the floor to anyone who wishes to make a comment to the Transportation Policy Board. Is anyone here to make a public comment today? Seeing none, we're going to move right off into our action items. And so first of all, we're going to be talking about the federal funding swap. Let me just share this with you. I had the opportunity to be at the TCC last Wednesday. Good meeting, great information. It helped me better understand the situation. I'm thankful for the explanation that TDOT brought, Preston, especially. I know it is a little bit different than maybe what we're used to, but we're going to have a good explanation here. But I'm going to turn it over to Michael for a few things, and then he'll let Preston speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Really appreciate your time this month. Typically, we try to cancel meetings in July to give you a summer break, and we try to follow Steve's lead in canceling RTA. But we do have important business this morning in terms of facilitating a strategy to help make sure we're using all of our obligation authority for federal funds across the state of Tennessee. You have in your packet a letter from Commissioner Ely dated July 8th, requesting that we consider a funding swap program with them. To describe what that looks like, I'll turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Elliott for a brief presentation, and then once he wraps up, I will be prepared to present staff recommendations that have the endorsement of our Transportation Coordinating Committee from the meeting that they had on the issue last week. So,
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. On this topic, I often feel like I'm going to try to explain how the internet works. So I'm partly joking here. But thank you for this important topic to cover, which has to do with federal funding update as well as the August redistribution. And the information I want to share with you today, it's not a Nashville MPO issue. It's not a state of Tennessee issue. It's a national issue. And we are going to be presenting some information here today that kind of highlights that national perspective, and then what it means for the state of Tennessee, and then what it means for your MPO. So I just want to put that into context. This is really a national issue, and we think we have a very good strategy that can help the state and help our urban areas, and specifically here in Nashville. So thank you. If you go to the next slide. So, oftentimes you probably wonder, you see your Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, and you're like, what is NHPP? What is SDBG? So these are all of the funding codes that go with the federal transportation bill. They're the federal aid funds that fund your projects locally through the MPO. They may be CMAQ funded projects or Transportation Alternative TAP funds. The two largest pots are the National Highway Program, Priority Program, NHPP, and then the Surface Transportation Block Group, STBG. There are actually 5 pots of STBG funds. You don't often see, or we don't really often talk about them. Most of the time when you look in the TIP, you might see STBGS or STBGU or M or L. Those distinctions really are, S is the state, meaning that there are STBG funds that can be spent anywhere in the state. And then the other ones in the M, L, or U, those may be urban, or they may, in some cases here, be Murfreesboro or local, meaning that they're less than the 50,000, but greater than 5,000 in population. Because the Nashville MPO is a very large MPO, you do have some urban areas that receive or have an allocation determination, I'd say, and then collectively within the MPO process, you all program those projects. So at the top is the apportionment number, and I'm going to explain it here in a few slides, but it's part of the transportation bill. It's not actually how much money we do get to spend, but that apportionment is at the top at the high level, and then it distributes down to those various pots within the program. So if you go to the next slide, Dan, thank you. So really what we're talking about is obligational authority, and which is the amount of monies that we have available to expend. The number between that and the apportionment, we don't really have authority or contract ability to spend the dollars. For context, we get about $1.1 billion annually in our state of apportionment, but on obligation, we only get about 84% of that number. So just to kind of give you context, we don't really get the full amount. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to try to describe this and explain it to you kind of using fish ponds and licenses. So while a pond may have many fish in it, let's say 16 in one and 20 in another, we may only have a permit. So you think about that permit as obligational authority or a limit to catch a certain number of fish. So in pond one, we have the ability to catch 10 fish, even though there are 16. And in the other, we have the ability to catch 5, and there's 20. So that is how kind of the apportionment and then the obligation authority. So our ability to actually cash in on those dollars. You go to the next slide. So this time of year, nationally, is what's called August redistribution. Basically, FHWA comes to the states and says, how much, if we were to give you additional obligational authority, how much could you expend between now and September 30th, okay, the end of the fiscal year? And so that delta is the increase in the additional obligational authority that they provide. And let me give you a little bit of context why I say this is a national issue. Unobligated funds nationally have been around $4 billion. This year, it's $8.7 billion. So literally in the last couple of years, that number has doubled. And you're probably sitting here thinking, why? There's many reasons. The two largest reasons is the infra grant that have yet to spend those, to obligate those funds. So a lot of projects that have been awarded big grants haven't cashed in. The other is what is called the TIFIA loan. And it's a program for which you borrow monies back against, and that money is not spending quite as fast. So those two programs have been built up, even though Congress has already given FHWA the ability to obligate funds. So that's why they provide that authority back to states. Now, when they provide that authority back to states, what they do is they look at the state and say, how much unobligated funds do you have in your state? Now, that's where this becomes somewhat of an issue for the state of Tennessee. We have the highest unobligated balance when you look at urban STBG funds. Those are funds that are to MPOs that are over 200,000 in population. So Nashville, Chattanooga, Knoxville, and Memphis. So in Tennessee, that is the large four. We're sitting on about $420 million, and about $208 million, I think, is that of here in the Nashville region. So just to give you context. So let me explain a little bit on this August redistribution a little bit more. So if you go to the next slide. So again, same pond concept. Basically, they let us fish for more. So that's what that August redistribution means. They basically are giving us authority to fish more, to use more of the funds. We'll go back to go to the next slide. So you may have wondered in the tip, you may have seen things called AC funded. And said, what is AC funded? AC funded is called advanced construction. It is a mechanism by which the feds allow states to essentially pre-finance or fund with non-federal funds, indicating to the feds that at some point in the future, the state is going to ask for a repayment. And AC funding is a very important strategy when you become into looking at August redistribution, because if we have funds available to us, then we can cash those in. And basically, it's really a cash flow management strategy if you think about it. So that's why if you ever see a project in your TIP, we're doing that because maybe we don't have the obligational authority in that fund code at that moment, but we want to and need to deliver that project. So we use state funds to get reimbursed at a later date. Okay, that makes sense? All right, so let's go to the next slide. So again, I've kind of mentioned to you the unobligated balance, what allows us to occur in August redistribution. Steps here to catch up. So I mentioned to you about the state having $420 million of urban STBG funds. Our number of actually unobligated is around 450, I think. this is where it becomes very concerning. We are like fourth in the nation on unobligated funds. Forget about whether it's urban SDBG, just in total. We're behind very large states like Texas, California, and Georgia. So our percentage is about 5.28% of that 8.7 billion. Keep that in mind, because when I finish at the end here, you're going to see what this risk exposure has to do with. So if we go to the next slide. So this has been something historically that the department has been over the years between $40 and $60 million we've been able to ask on August redistribution. That's because that's about how much play we have within our fund programs on asking for additional obligational authority. However, when we look at our peer states, we're seeing our peer states addressing August redistribution at a much more aggressive level. And so you can see here, states like South Carolina, Kentucky, and North Carolina, they receive roughly about the same apportionment that Tennessee does, around 1.1 to 1.2 billion. Virginia and Georgia are slightly more at a 1.4, 1.7 billion. But you can see these states are in their August redistribution bringing back a sizable number in comparison to Tennessee. And I'm going to fix on North Carolina, because the strategy that we have before you today has to do with a fund swap program, and that's what they do in North Carolina. And you can see that their August redistribution on the same time periods for Tennessee has been in the over 100 to $200 million annually. So if we go to the next slide. So I've already talked to you about Tennessee having the highest. I've kind of given you an indication of where these are. And just for context, annually, the four large, now five with Clarksville, the urban SDBG funds is about $68 million annually. So that's about how much comes to the large MPOs. That's how we derived about 6 years worth of allocation available of unobligated funds. I want to talk to you about something, because if you recall in the past, we would come to you and previous commissioners will come to you and say, you need to obligate your funds, you move your projects. I want to talk to you about that, because if you look to the right side, and you all know this, you have done your job, you've programmed those projects, you're seeing those projects move through the process. The problem is it's a very complicated process, and it's very hard to obligate these funds through phases. So I want to talk to you about an organizational change that we made back at the end of May, which I hope that you find very favorably. When we presented at the TCC, I think there was a lot of nods of success here. The department has created a new division of local programs and community investments. We are basically elevating our local programs component so that we can interface with you and your staff as you develop your projects. In addition to creating it as a division, we're actually putting engineers in that division. So they'll be able to interface with your engineers to move your projects along. The director is Steve Allen. It's a name I hope that many of you have heard before. I just want to say within the last month and a half, I know we've made some small successes on some things, but it's only been 6 weeks. And one of those is here in the Nashville area. We have made a change in our manual to allow for IDIQ, which basically means if you pre-select architecture engineering services that meet the definition for a federal aid program project, you can use that. What does that mean in Metro? That may save them 6 to 8 months on a project, right from the get-go. So those are the types of changes that we look to employ more of to make the process smoother and to help you move these projects through the process. So we recognize, I just want to say here, we recognize that why the unobligated balance is high is because that process is complicated. You all have done your job in programming projects. We need to help you figure out how to move those projects to delivery quicker. If we go to the next slide, please. I mentioned to you about North Carolina, and essentially what they do is they swap their their SDBG flex funds for SDBG urban. So what that means is that we have the ability that we can use our SDBG flex funds anywhere in the state. You can only use your urban SDBG funds in your MPA and your metropolitan planning area. That's the only place you can use them. So when we talk about this fund swap, what that means is that if we borrow your money, we must spend that money in your area. when I talk to you about some projects here, these funds are not going to Memphis. These funds are not going to Knoxville or Chattanooga. They must stay in this urban area. So there's the strategy that we've been working with your staff probably now 2+ months, I think, is there's two parts to August redistribution. First, we want to help you get your projects delivered. That's the first thing, because if you obligate your funds, that's great for the state of Tennessee. And it's great for your communities because your projects are getting built. The second part of that is that this kind of fund swap, anything remaining that you feel comfortable with obligating or letting us obligate, we would use in that fund swap, and it's basically we borrow, we pay back, and that there are many safeguards in place to ensure that the repayment occurs. One of those safeguards are right here next to me, the Federal Highway Administration. But all jokes aside, there's safety provisions within the federal code that allow for this and ensure for your money's coming back. And then also the most important thing, I think, is your TIP. You all are the controllers and managers of the TIP, and through that process, you have the ability to essentially to come down or slow down anything to ensure repayment. I don't think we'll need to worry about that because really for me, it is more of an administrative kind of financial backside of the office type of thing that we're talking about here. Your projects are your projects, what you prioritize are your priorities. It really is just a cash flow management decision here. So I think we go to the next slide, and I'll try to finish up. I think I only have about 2 more slides, and I apologize for going a little long here. I already mentioned about most of this already. So basically, it has to be obligated by September 30th. AC funding is a strategy, as I mentioned. Let's see here. So this is important. In some cases, on August redistribution, it is just converting the AC funding back. We're just basically paying back ourselves with the state funds, federal and state. In some cases, and in here in Nashville, it actually translates into projects being let. Why is that? Because today we don't have enough obligational authority that we control to let several projects that are in your community. And so we have one construction project and 3 resurfacing projects, and I'll share that at the last slide here. But so that's what August redistribution lets you do. If you go to the next slide, I want to talk about why this is important. I mentioned to you about the unobligated national number there, and I'm going to come talk about that in a moment. But really, and you all know this, projects don't get any cheaper. The project is going to be as cheap as it is today. In the future, it's going to cost more. So as you think about that funds that are unobligated, that balance, your buying power is being lost. If we go back to prior to 2020, you could get a lot more for a project than you can get today. And we know that because we see high cost estimates. We, in essence, are leaving monies on the table that other states are making use of. They're going to ask for their ability to get an August redistribution. We think we should be at the table too and have that be successful for our state and our urban areas. And then the last part I want to talk about is risk. When we made this presentation about a week and a half ago or so, this was really a concern of ours. We were getting an indication that it's hard for FHWA to award large discretionary grants when they look at a state and see a big unobligated balance. Now, I mentioned over $400 million. Well, today and tomorrow, actually, there'll be an announcement even larger. But Tennessee was successful with Arkansas in receiving almost $400 million discretionary grant for a bridge across the Mississippi. Anytime that we can get new monies to our state, it helps all of us because we can make the monies that we do have go further. You all may or may not know this, but since 2020, the state of Tennessee, minus the bridge, has received over $325 million in discretionary grants. About $125 million of that has gone to cities and counties. About $125 million has gone to transit agencies, and about $75 million has gone to the state on several projects. Our ability to draw down unobligated balances makes it look better for us to those in DC because when they're looking nationally, they want to see that we're spending our money. So we really want to help you all advance the projects that you have, help you achieve and get discretionary grants, because again, that's bringing new monies to our state. So that's a risk that we had a higher risk before, but it's still important. And then I think the most significant risk is this last one on the Delphi versus FEMA. So I'm not going to get into it too much, but Delphi is the federal government management system of all expenditures. FEMA is the system that we interact with through FHWA on the federal aid project. And when the recent transportation bill, IIJA, was passed, there was a discrepancy of roughly $3.5 billion between those two systems. Now, we all know that the big system wins out, so any discrepancy has to be addressed. Now, I think FHWA has gotten that number down to about $1 billion. Now, remember what I said before about the state of Tennessee having one of the highest unobligated balances? If they need to come cash in on the money to figure out how to rectify that, they're going to be coming to states that have high balances, or at least at a percentage basis. So that's a risk for us. And again, around the risk of rescissions, I think, Michael, you had mentioned back in 2009, we had some funds rescinded as that. And then some of you know, as part of the CRISA funds that were part of the COVID, Congress acted like in 3 days, and the state of Tennessee had about $14 million that was going to be rescinded, and thankfully we're successful to make some moves within the TIP process to avoid that. But that risk and liability is out there, and so we just see that as having such a high unobligated balance of the state. It's important for us to think about the strategy about how best to reduce that risk. If you want to go to the 2 more slides, I think I have, these are the projects that we would use the swap fund for here in the Nashville MPO area, just to give you context. So one project there in Rutherford, 3 resurfacing, 2 in Williamson and 1 in Murray. So that's how we would use these swap funds. I know I've said a lot. I don't know, Michael or Chairman, how you'd like to proceed, but.
Well, thank you, Preston. Michael, do you want to talk about
Well, any questions for
projects?
Preston before I get into staff analysis, recommendations, any immediate reaction to anything that Preston shared? Questions?
So, Preston, I talked with our public works director and our planning director yesterday, and they said your explanation was good, hit the target. And after they talked with you last week, got the explanation with you, they said, absolutely, we need to do this. And I thought, well, you had me at more money. So I appreciate your spending time with us.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My question is really kind of what you led off with, that you all were making some changes in the process to try to expedite the process outside the IDIQ. What other things might be in there, and is there anything that can shorten the NEPA piece of all of that?
Yeah.
That seems to be what drags on and on and on.
So first, I think I'd like to say that I really appreciate the board and staff having the local programs kind of working group over the last, what was it, almost year and a half, 2. A lot of that dialogue helps think about what we can do to help improve the process. So some of the things we're starting to explore here as well. But to answer your question, one area that we would like to explore, and we think that could have viability, is rather than your projects dropping into the disciplines within the department, specifically on off-system projects, is that we would have within the department essentially consulting services that would do those reviews, and then our staff would QA/QC. So instead of it getting, you move along and you go into the environmental division, you go into the design or right-of-way and construction, that would be all within the local programs and community investments division. That way we eliminate any communication issues. And so we streamline that process. That's an exploration that we'd like to do, but that's going to require us to update the local government guidelines and streamline the process, which we want to do as well. I jokingly say that it has more stop signs than the MUTCD does, but which is the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. But the goal here is really to have a process that helps expedite projects that are locally managed, not attempt to mimic the department's process. We really need to make sure we're ensuring that we're meeting the federal aid guidelines and requirements and ensuring that, rather than a process that we've had for more than 2 decades, probably almost 3 decades.
Any other questions for Preston before Michael shares something?
Thank you, Preston. Well, for our part, we have in your packet a handout that contains our staff analysis and staff recommendation. I'm going to focus mostly on the recommendation because our analysis is essentially concurring with the information that Preston gave and the perspective on the benefit to moving forward in this way. I may add the concept isn't new. It's a conversation that we've had with the department over the years. Prior commissioners, Paul Deggs is in the room. We've talked about funding, swapping out funding codes historically. What has typically gotten in the way, though, is really no clear, spelled out method for doing that. So you'll see in our staff recommendation that we are recommending that you agree to move forward with a fund swap. And we're just talking about STBG funds at the moment, but subject to kind of spelling out how this would work, how would repayment work, what would the process be. We want, you all should be skeptical on some level of this, and so you would want the department to put in writing how they intend to repay when your projects are ready for obligation. We feel very confident that if your project is ready for obligation, it's going to get obligated. But we have taken measures in what we've prepared today to make sure that we have enough cushion for the next year to obligate anything that we feel should be obligated on the locally managed project list with STBG funds. And so the staff analysis, again, is just concurring a lot with what Preston laid out, but I will underscore a couple of things. One is that reducing unobligated balances will demonstrate a greater need to the federal government for that August redistribution. It's really important that we get as much obligation authority as possible to maximize our use of the federal pots of money. It also, as Preston laid out, increases for some discretionary grant programs our competitiveness. And I know there was a lot of conversation about the fund swap approach in the lead up to the initial announcement about the Memphis Bridge. And so I think the work that the department has been doing with the Tennessee Federal Highway Division has been really what has shaped. It's not been 2.5 months that we've been working on this, but it does feel that way. It's been about a month. And so this is really, the conversations are happening fairly quickly for this particular board action that we're requesting from you, but this is not a new practice, and it is happening now because we're nearing the end of the federal fiscal year, and we're trying to get as much money obligated as possible. So for staff's recommendation, we've identified about $148 million in unobligated funding in the current TIF on locally managed projects that we think we can get obligated before the end of the federal fiscal year. 50-something million of that, it's in the numbers here, 52.8 million is in the form of SDBG funds suballocated to the Nashville-Davidson urbanized area, which is part of 7 counties. It's not just Nashville. Many of you are included in that urbanized area. So the suballocation of funding to that area, 52.8 million, and those funds we think we can get obligated before the end of the fiscal year. Thanks in large part to the work of the department over the last few weeks with our staff and local governments to overcome some of the remaining obstacles to obligations. So $52.8 million there. And then there's an additional $18.6 million currently in the TIP in the form of other grant funds that are on projects that we think can get obligated as well. So that's about, that's a little over $70 million that we think we can get obligated by the end of September on locally managed projects as it's currently programmed by fund code in the current TIP. In addition, we feel comfortable recommending that you all agree to swapping out $77.3 million in STBG funds that are suballocated to the Nashville-Davidson UZA that we do not believe can be obligated before fiscal year 2026. And our accounting of that amount is contained in List B, included in the package. And anytime we talk about project lists, you're either, most people are either going to be very happy because they see their project on the list because it's a list for funding, or they're going to be unhappy because their project's not there, or they're on a list like List B. Let me assure you that even though your project may be on List B, which are the projects we don't believe can be obligated before 2026, and is the basis for the accounting to the 77.3 million number, we have assurances from the department, and they'll put this into writing, that if something accelerates on your project that gets you to the need to obligate in fiscal year 2025, we're going to be able to do that. either because of the repayment that they will spell out in writing, or because of the fact that we are not willing to swap out more than $87 million of our STBG funds. So we've held that back and made it not subject to the swap because we know we've got about that amount of projects that we expect to get obligated in the coming fiscal years. So again, $148 million that we think we can get obligated by the end of the year. About half of that in the way that it's currently programmed in the TIP funding code. The other half would be a swap out, again, STBG funds, and no TIP amendments are needed for the swap, the same funding code, but it would be in the form of we swap out the regional funds to TDOT, they obligated on projects within our region, and then they repay us with the statewide money from the STBG funds when our projects are ready to obligate. So our recommendation is it's really twofold. One is that we have proposed amendments for you this morning that are necessary to obligate some of the projects in the current TIPs that are part of the $52.8 million. Some amendments that need to be processed to facilitate that obligation. So we ask for that action. And then we also have brought a resolution for your consideration that would essentially permit us to continue our conversations with TDOT on standing up a swap program. We will be preparing a memorandum of understanding that would be presented to you for adoption at your September 18th meeting. Of course, we've got a couple of TCC meetings to go before then, so there'll be plenty of opportunity to weigh in on the details of that MOU. But we would ask that you entertain adoption of resolution TPB 2024-05, essentially authorizing us as your staff to coordinate with TDOT on identifying opportunities for the swap and to essentially authorize the swap subject to the conditions that we've laid out, which is that the state only spend that money within our region, which is the federally bound to do. So it's sort of more ceremonial to point that out. And then second, that we put into place an MOU that spells out the details of how this would work, including the process for requesting payment, the timelines associated with repayment, and that locally managed projects that are ready to obligate won't be adversely impacted by the swap program itself. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about how we arrived at that $148 million total of funding that we think we can get obligated over the next couple of months. Otherwise, Mr. Chair, I'll hand it back over to you.
Any questions for Michael before we seek a motion on this resolution? I'm going to ask for resolution TPB 2024-05. Do we have a motion?
I'll move that with comment.
We have a second?
Second.
And so let's open it up for some comments. And so, Mayor.
Well, I must admit that I was skeptical when I first heard about this, and I really appreciate the staff working through this and giving the explanation they've given. And Deputy Commissioner, your explanation has been very, very helpful this morning. And I think that we're all interested in moving projects forward, and we're also very interested in a new level of cooperation between this body and your body there, TDOT. Yesterday, several of us had a meeting with the executive leadership team of one of our larger corporations. And one of the things they mentioned what their challenges are. One was transportation, of course, and secondly was housing. And in my mind, housing and transportation are so closely aligned that we need to be working together to figure out some housing solutions somewhere or other along with the General Assembly. I would make a comment also about List C, Columbia Avenue, State Route 6, US 31. I never have heard Jonathan willing to give us money. Jonathan Marston from our engineering department, but he says that money could probably go on the flex obligatory authority list, $20,800,000. We're not quite ready for that. That's correct.
It could go to List B. And to be clear, I'm not giving that money up. But for a second, But yeah, we won't be, we're in right of way now, so it'll be a couple of years with that project in the right of way. So realistically, that one could be less. Especially if we get into such a large sum of money, that one could be included in it.
So just the construction
Yes.
funds from that.
The right of way, we definitely need, but the construction on this fee, that could be priced.
Well, and, go ahead, Mayor, and I'll.
And then I have one final comment, and that is, we're all struggling with the escalation of cost of projects that we're seeing. And the $3 billion that the General Assembly put into PDOT, we're certainly appreciative of that. But I would challenge PDOT and this group that I'm concerned that our current way that we fund transportation in the state of Tennessee is not sustainable long-term, and we need to be looking at other alternatives for bringing additional money into the system to get all these projects done that we need to be doing. We're way, way behind. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Anyone else? And just briefly, you know, if you probably got your email and you opened it up and you read, you went, wait a minute, I've got a List B project. And at the moment, you kind of stop for a moment. What about my project? I have one on here as well, List B. And then when I worked our way through it, went to TCC, understood what we're doing, the MOUs are going to be important. We'll see that draft in September. Everybody will have a level of confidence, I believe, that we're going to be getting the money when we need the money. And things could happen. Your project could slow down or speed up, and we'll deal with that when we get there, right?
Yes, sir, and to the point about the list, your projects aren't stuck on the list. The lists are showing you the math of how we arrived at the 87 million that we don't want to swap, and then the 70+ million that we do want to swap. So the projects are going to move in and out of these lists, but I think what we are trying to say is that we'd like to retain, not swap out an amount of money because we know it's going to be needed, but you know, so don't focus too much on which list your project is right now, but I do credit City of Franklin for being straightforward about the timing of obligation, because we often are trying to shake loose money that are stuck on projects that aren't obligated to get it to projects that are. So as a course of our normal process, having that kind of information is really important.
That's why we spent so much time in task force as well, trying to figure out how to move this money, move these projects along the way. You know, the thing that stands out, when we looked at it last week and even today, is North Carolina's over $200 million ahead of us in what they're doing. And the more money, the better, right?
And Mr. Chair, maybe not to extend this agenda item, but it's also important for people to hear, I think, that the projects that would be funded through the swap are in the 10-year plan with committed resources that get then freed up.
This does not change the 10-year plan. If it does, what it's doing is something that we have in 25 occurs sooner. It isn't that we're picking something that's not on the list. The resurfacings, we're in a resurfacing program. State Route 99 is in the 10-year plan. So this just allows us to if those things are ready, and really the only thing we're waiting on is the availability of funding, that's what that lets us do. If you notice in the 10-year plan, you'll see some things that say traditional or federal funds. They're placed in those horizons because that's when our funding becomes available. It isn't that we want to make it wait that long. But if you have the additional authority, absolutely, that's what it does. It moves those projects sooner to occur. And as to the list, you know, I think really what staff has done is a great job ensuring that the monies that you need are there. The list means nothing to the department. We are going to move on every single one of your projects, irrespective of what list they're on.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
And then want to thank the Transportation Coordinating Committee for their endorsement under the leadership of Josh Sudas. So thank you for the conversation just last week. And with that, we'll be quiet.
Any other comments before we vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, thank you for that. Next, we're going to be talking about amending the TIP. I'm going to turn it over to Shay, our TIP coordinator.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So as a review, the TIP is a 4-year program that lists all regionally significant and federally funded projects in our MPO area. It must be consistent with the regional transportation plan and must be fiscally constrained. The current TIP is fiscal year 2023 to 2026, which was adopted in November 2022 and accounts for about $1.7 billion. And you can access all of the projects and information on them at gnrc.org/tip. So there are 7 projects today with amendments, adding about $23.5 million in federal funds, with near 11 million of those funds programming reserve as a result of the MPO's proposed approach to August redistribution that we just discussed. So first up is Spring Hills Jim Warren Road Bridge over I-65. This amendment adds the project to the TIP. This project will replace and widen to 4 lanes the existing Jim Warren Bridge Road over I-65 to accommodate additional traffic resulting from growth. This adds about $16 million in local funds to the fiscal year 2024 NEPA design and construction phases. Next is Hendersonville's Walton Ferry and Old Shackle Island Road Improvement Project. This will widen Walton Ferry Road from 2 to 3 lanes from Noakes Drive to Main Street and align with Old Shackle Island Road at Main Street. This adds about $2.5 million in federal USTBG funds for fiscal year 2024 construction phase from reserve funding and about $800,000 in local funds for the fiscal year 2024 construction phase. Next is Franklin's McEwen Drive widening phase 4. This project will widen and improve McEwen Drive to 4 lanes. This amendment adds $7.8 million in federal USTBG funds for the fiscal year 2024 construction phase from reserve funds and about $10 million in local funds for the 2024 construction phase. Next is TDOT's I-65 widening from Rivergate Parkway to near Blue Star Road, US 31W. This project will be constructed via design build and will widen I-65 from 4 to 6 lanes. This amendment adds about $130 million in advanced construction, NHPP, provided to the project by the Transportation Modernization Act for the fiscal year 2025 construction phase. So these are state funds that will later be converted to federal NHPP funds. And this also swaps out about $30 million in NHPP funds from fiscal year 2025 construction phase. Next is Hendersonville's closed loop and signal upgrade. This project will connect, synchronize, and upgrade traffic signals. And this amendment adds about $400,000 in federal USCBG funds for fiscal year 2024 construction from reserve funding. Next is Franklin's ITS infrastructure. This expands the ITS infrastructure network capabilities. This adds near $200,000 in federal USCBG funds for the fiscal year 2024 construction phase from reserve funding. Lastly is RTA's Donaldson Station Transit Center. This will upgrade the station infrastructure to support a full multimodal transit center. And this amendment adds the project to the TIP with $3 million in federal FTA community project funding, CPF, funds provided through a discretionary grant by the FTA from congressionally directed spending for a community project for the fiscal year 2024 implementation phase, and adds $10 million in federal FTA 5339 funds for the 2024 implementation phase. I will go back to the chair for any questions.
Any questions for staff on these proposed amendments? Seeing none, we'll open up for a public hearing. Is there any public comments dealing with this TIP amendment? Seeing none, we'll move for a motion on TPB 2024-06. Do we have a motion to approve? We have a motion. Do we have a second? Any other discussions or questions on this particular resolution?
Mr. Chair, just to congratulate WeGo Public Transit for their successful application.
And we thank Congressman Rose for getting us the community
All right, seeing none, all in favor say aye. All opposed, all right. Thank you for that. Next up, we're gonna turn it over to Daniel about the revisions for the functional classification.
All right, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So today we have for you a few proposed revisions to the federal functional classification system. You may have heard about this at prior meetings, but just to provide some background, the federal functional classification system provides a framework for identifying the role that roadways play in moving vehicles. These can be based on mobility, accessibility, land use, and other factors, and they inform roadway design as well as federal aid opportunities. I want to be clear, this is not related to our ongoing call for revisions. So in May, we presented on a functional classification call for revisions that is still open for local governments as well as TDOT. This is a backlog of 2 changes for 2 state routes that were realigned, requested by TDOT from last year that we're just approving. So please continue to coordinate with us on any revisions that you think are necessary in your local area, and we'll make sure to evaluate those and get them approved. So going into the revisions themselves, the first requested revision is in Sumner and Robertson counties, changing the classification of old State Route 109 between North Broadway and Magnolia Springs Road, changing that from a principal arterial to a local road to reflect the change in alignment and the new alignment, adding State Route 109 on a new alignment from Magnolia Springs Road to I-65. That'll be a principal arterial. And then just reflecting that new alignment, the map is on the screen if you're curious. And then the second requested revision is removing old State Route 247 at the Beechcroft Railroad Grade Crossing from the state highway system to a local road, and then the realignment State Route 247 Beechcroft Road at the intersection with State Route 396, which is Saturn Parkway, adding Saturn Parkway on a new alignment from State Route 6 to State Route 247 as a minor arterial. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them, but I'll pass it back to the chair.
Any questions for Daniel or staff? Mayor?
I understand what you're doing, what we're doing. I guess what is the next step? Is that a TDOT thing that they've been to approve this? And what is their process for approval if it goes to them, and what is the timeline plan typically for that type?
Sure, it's a good question. So TDOT has already approved this. This is essentially a formality for us to give a letter of support concurrence so that they can then submit to Federal Highway and obtain approval from Federal Highway. And I would imagine it's a pretty quick turnaround for changes like this. This will also be the same process that we'll go through, which we did go through with McEwen last year, but which we'll go through with the board on any future revisions as we go throughout this process.
Any other questions? Daniel? All right, next up, we're needing a motion for TPB 2024-07. We have a motion on the floor? Have a motion, do we have a second? Second. Any other comments or questions on the functional classification system? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. Next, we'll move to regular reports. We'll go to Sean with Federal Highway.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean Santaya with the Federal Highway Administration Tennessee Division. So for FHWA's report, first off, I just want to thank Preston for, and TDOT as a whole for prioritizing this issue of August redistribution. Preston, your presentation, I think you delivered in about 15 minutes. FHWA has a whole 3-day financing federal aid highways course that delivers largely the same message. So this is an incredibly complex nationwide issue that has nuances between US DOT and Department of Treasury and Congress and the executive branch. But at the end of the day, this is an opportunity that we really can't miss out on to bring additional money to Tennessee. And with the way that the bipartisan infrastructure law was funded, if we don't capitalize on this now, which you all have already taken action to and are fully on that path towards doing, there is a very real chance that we miss out on this in future years. As we start to see these infra grants that are advancing, as we start to see additional use of the funding that's in that infrastructure law, these opportunities for additional obligation authority are just going to become smaller and smaller and less opportune. So we very much, again, want to thank CDOT, want to thank the MPO board here and all of our MPO partners across the state in prioritizing this so that we can capitalize on it. Local to the Tennessee division, we mentioned at the last meeting that we do have a new division administrator. Dan Hinton has joined the team. Dan was planning to come. I think Preston mentioned there is a celebration tomorrow for the I-55 Bridge Replacement Grant Award, so he has been pulled into that. But we do want to get him to one of these meetings to be able to introduce himself. We also have in the back of the room Jason Oldham. Jason, if you can wave your hand, our technical services team leader. Some of you will know Jason from previous roles with TDOT, with National DOT. So Jason has on his team our safety programs, structures, operations, and other more technical teams. And then we are bringing in a grants and local programs coordinator in recognition of the opportunities that we have to deliver more efficiently and effectively in our grants, in local programs, to identify streamlining efforts, to identify program improvements, all the work that TDOT has been putting in. We want to be coming along right in partnership with TDOT, so we are bringing in a new staff person that is going to be there to be able to provide that federal perspective to what are some of the things that we can do to update the process, modernize the process, capitalize on any streamlining and flexibility that are out there that we're not currently maybe taking as much advantage of as we can to be able to deliver on these investments. So we're hoping we can have someone on in the next couple of months. They'll be sitting on Jason's team, and so just looking forward to continuing to work with TDOT and all of your communities when we bring that person on to hear what are the challenges, what are the things that FHWA in partnership with TDOT can do to be able to assist in delivering these projects. We are working with TDOT also on the I-24 Smart Choice Lanes project. The Choice Lanes project, and have initiated NEPA on that, working with TDOT on what some of those preliminary designs would look like and environmental impacts that could be associated with those, and building a path forward towards NEPA approval, and then advising on what that P3 procurement would look like. I'm sure Preston can speak to it more in more depth, but that is a priority area of our office. We are in receipt of urban area boundaries, adjusted urban area boundaries from the MPO, and working with TDOT on not so much revising or clarifying the urban area boundary adjustments within the Nashville area, but more kind of statewide when we look at impacts of the census across the state, and making sure that we've done all the appropriate and required adjustments before we take that approval action and submit that up to headquarters for inclusion in all of our data elements and things like these funding systems that require and depend on those adjusted urban area boundaries, as well as the functional class. When we approve those functional class changes, all of that then has to get filtered up to our data teams up in headquarters to make sure that it gets reflected in things like our fiscal management system. There are several grant programs that are open currently related to safety and electric vehicle charging. So we have shared those with staff, and I know staff is doing a good job of sharing a report on those. So would very much encourage all of your communities to be looking into those. And then last thing I noted down, Mayor Moore, I want to kind of commend you and ask for some of your leadership on. You mentioned housing and transportation and the link between those. And actually, the bipartisan infrastructure law wrote into law and kind of codified a recognition that there is a nexus between transportation and housing, and a requirement that MPOs, as y'all are carrying out your planning, that there is a consideration for housing needs and inclusion of any housing associations and organizations. And to US DOT, this is sort of a new area. We're still kind of trying to figure out what guidance would look like, what expectations would look like. That's going to depend on that buy-in from those of you that are the boots on the ground, that know where you do see that nexus between transportation issues and housing issues, how that can then inform our transportation investments. So you're very prophetic, I guess, in bringing that up, yeah. So that's all that I had. Happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Any questions for Sean? Thank you, Sean. Next, we'll go to T-Dot. As Preston, you're going to fill us in.
Appreciate, again, the opportunity to be here today. I believe in your packet, you have a statewide partnership. I think it's near the back portion of your agenda packet. You also probably got an email last week. So if you recall, back about this time last year, the passage of the CMA and the department went through an effort to essentially develop the 10-year plan, which you all have seen. And in the development of that, we established a statewide partnership program in which we did a call for projects for which communities had already had committed funds or were committed funds to a project in their community to be considered for funding by the department. We learned a lot through that process. We had over 102 projects submitted. About 66 of them were really consistent with the program. The other remaining projects are more consistent with our annual grant programs like the Multimodal Access Grant or the Transportation Alternatives Program grant, some of the other grant things that we have out there. So this particular program is largely for the advancement of highway projects. So those other programs still exist. In the future, we might be able to consolidate some of our grant programs and do a more multimodal call. But at this moment in time, we're have this highway-oriented one. So back to this, the last year's process. Of those 66 projects, we learned that there was about $350 million that communities across the state had on projects. Those funds could be local, they could have been private, and in some cases they were MPO dollars, much like you're talking about here today. It was wonderful to learn that. The problem was that the ask was $2.4 billion. So clearly the need for transportation is greater than the funding available in our state. Mayor Moore spoke to about that, about the funding and needs that we have. So this go around, we're attempting to do two things. One, as we've mentioned in the 10-year plan, is that we will update it every year. So we'll start this process, and the statewide partnership program is part of that process. Between now and December, we will update the 10-year plan, adding in the new 11th year, so that the next year of the funding. Some of you had asked me earlier before the meeting started about the 10-year plan. Many things impact the 10-year plan projects. The project schedule, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute, but the other aspect is project cost. And so those two are related to one another in terms of schedule. About 2 years ago, we were delivering about half of the projects that we had in the 3-year plan. Half. Today, we're at about 90%. So we are delivering more that we have in our plan than we had in the past. That's a very positive thing because, as I mentioned before, projects don't get any cheaper. So the more successful we are on delivery, the higher probability that we can hedge off cost inflation. So that's a plus. Anytime we get discretionary grant, that's additional new money. You may or may not know this, but our 10-year plan does have cost increases for projects, but our revenue assumptions are flat. So if revenue is higher, that is something that we look at annually as we update the 10-year plan. So again, back to the SPP, the statewide partnership program, we hope to, as we did last time, we're doing the call. It's open between now and August 30th. We will run our analysis later in the year between September and November, and then have again, as we announce the 10-year plan. Two parts to this. One is what we can get into the 10-year plan. What we don't is we envision on sharing with legislature this session to let them know that there continues to be a funding need out there in the state greater than the revenues available, going back to your comment, so that we can educate them about the community needs, the level of investment that you are already making in your communities, and how additional revenues are needed to support that. So it's really twofold. The other part that is different this year is we're putting a lot more focus back on the MPO and RPO process. We're asking you to work through the MPO so that the priorities and the plans and the efforts that you all collectively work together on can be reflective in advance. So really supporting that plan process and the projects in the communities, in your communities that are needed. We have on the back part of the information is some frequently asked questions. You know, I submitted last year, do I need to submit again? Yes, if you're not in the 10-year plan. There's other components to this. There may be a project in the 10-year plan that you want to see happen sooner. If you have either STBG funds or you have local funds or private funds and you want to see that project happen sooner, that could make an impact, and that is a good STP project to consider submitting. Want to point that out. Again, I talked to you about other types of projects in the back we have on the bottom corner, all of the grant programs that the department has available, as well as the grant programs that Sean mentioned that are out there. Our department, if you're seeking a federal grant, I know a lot of communities have been successful with the Safe Streets for All, SS4A. Please let us know. We provide letters of support. It helps also for us to know what you're seeking so that we can be thinking about where do they fit within the 10-year plan, how do they fit relative to our other funding programs. Oftentimes, WEGO has been very successful in leveraging some of our improved capital transit with discretionary grants. I think the Antioch station is a great example. $5 million discretionary grant, $5 million state funds. So,
And hopefully not later this year.
there you go. That must be a pitch. But anyhow, this information is there. MPO staff have access to the ability to assist you. We really are, again, wanting it to support the plan process. We'll probably send out another email with additional frequently asked questions. We've tried to streamline the questions, so really helping to advance projects that you have already committed to.
Thank you,
Oh,
Preston.
I'm sorry, one more point. And Sean, and I would be remiss, he mentioned the I-24 corridor and our public-private partnership. I'd like to introduce Rebecca Hammett from TDOT, and she just got a few words, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I think that Rebecca Hammond, you may know me as the TDOT Region 3 Community Relations Officer. I am now going to be the primary communications officer for the P3 division, so choice lanes, specifically I-24 Southeast from National Park Bureau, as we know. We just wanted to mention and inform you that upcoming this next month, we have a series of our first public meetings. So as Sean mentioned, we are working toward getting NEPA approval, but we will have a series of 4 public meetings in August, virtual, and then 3 in person. If you would like more information, I would be happy to point you in that direction. We also have all that information on our website. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions for Preston before we move on?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question, and Preston, you and I have talked about this offline, but some of the local governments in the room have state funding pledges to cost sharing that match the federal funds in the TIP that don't necessarily appear itemized in the 10-year plan. You want to speak to the department's commitment?
Yeah, there are some projects. I know that has been a question that's come up. So if you have a locally managed project, for example, in the city of Franklin, there's a locally managed project and the department has committed to the match on that. Those, myself, the chief engineer, those projects are moving forward. Where if you were counting on the department to deliver phases of a project, those need to be in the 10-year plan. So if for example, I think in Mount Juliet, there are actually a statewide partnership project, and that's in there, and because I think you're looking for us to do the construction, I believe. Yeah. Similarly, I think in Nolensville, you have made some requests. Those types of projects, unless they're in the 10-year plan, are not. But if you have a project for which we're providing that match component, then that's it.
Any other questions before we move on? All right, thank you. We'll go to Chair's report. Just a couple of things. We did get the updated paving list. We'll be emailing that out to you, so be looking for that. Staff get it out so you can see what TDOT's fixing to do on a paving list around your area. couple things just to share with you. So probably over the last year, I've talked to different members, and there's been a couple things that have been brought to my attention or that you have spoken about. One reason why we got off into the task force was to go over some things. There's concerns, maybe transparency about where are the funds, where are the dollars, who has the projects. I just want you to know if you have any of those questions or concerns, just let me know. We'll put that in any report that needs to be published so you can see all that. We'll take care of that as well. One of the other things that is probably no secret that maybe communication was maybe not at a premium, the perception of it between communication and cooperation, maybe between different entities working on these projects. One thing I can share with you, having spoke to staff and TDOT, they are really improving the communications ongoing. So I really appreciate that, and they're getting together more, making sure everybody's on the same page. So if you ever have any of those concerns or questions, feel free to reach out to me and do my best to get you the information that you're looking to do. But I have been really encouraged the meetings that have been going on leading up to these. And so because at the end of the day, you have a project, you're here, you want your money, your grant, your project. And to make that happen, we got to have the MPO and TDOT working together and Federal Highway, everybody on the same page, and that's what we want to do. So moving forward. So that's all I had under Chair's report. Next, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start my report by just commending you for your participation in the meetings that you're referencing. It was really impressive that you attended our Transportation Coordinating Committee meeting last week. We don't expect you to be at all of those, but I think it says a lot to have you at those meetings. And if you don't realize, Josh Sudas, the chair of the Transportation Coordinating Committee, has probably not missed the Transportation Policy Board meeting in his tenure. So I appreciate you being here representing the committee in addition to your home county. For the remainder of my report, I've got a couple of things to share with you. One is you have in your packet the TIP status report that we promised to deliver at each of these meetings. We have Taylor Lee on our staff who can speak to any of the details within the report, but the bottom line here is that we're tracking the rate of obligation of the funding that's included in the TIP. I think Daniel, you referenced, or Shay referenced $1.7 billion that's programmed in the TIP. So far to date, we have obligated about 39% of our federal funds, and we are 44% of the effective period through the TIP. So if we were to match the amount of time within the 4-year program against the amount of money we have, we are a little bit behind schedule, but I think the push to obligate by the end of fiscal year 2024 will demonstrate a pretty big increase, or it'll begin to close the gap between that light blue graph and the orange benchmark there. Also want to discuss a little bit or provide a preview of upcoming meetings. We've got our next meeting of the regional council body, city and county mayors across 13 counties, as well as the business and social equity appointments that get together to talk about issues of the region more comprehensively, so transportation, housing, economic development, social services, so on and so forth. Our next scheduled meeting is on August 21st. Right now, we're saying that meeting is in our offices, 44 Advantage Way. We don't, that'll be where we are unless you hear otherwise from us. And then just want to make sure that you have the September 17th Power of 10 Summit on your calendar. I don't believe registration is open yet. That'll be at Music City Center. I did check the website this morning, didn't see an RSVP link. But as soon as it's available, we'll push that out so that you can get registered. There will be, as there typically is, a regional mayor's panel, an opportunity for us to demonstrate that the work that we're doing together across Middle Tennessee to coordinate conversations across local governments. And then the next convening of this body will be September 18th. And, you know, what you'll be most interested in that day is likely the MOU. Preston, I'd love to work with you to get a draft to the August TCC, so we leave ourselves plenty of time to collect input from our members before September 18th. But that'll be probably the highest priority for action that day, along with any additional TIP amendments that we need to make to facilitate the obligation of federal funds. And then lastly, Couple of staffing updates to share with you. I'm very pleased to share with you all today. I'm not going to give a name, but we've been going through the process to interview candidates for the vacant NPO coordinator position. Had a really great interview last week, and I'm going to thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mayor Vogel, and Mayor Reed, and Jim Kerr, and Josh Studis, and Matt Meservey with TDOT for being part of that process. But I am pleased to share that we have extended an offer and had an acceptance from the candidate. The gentleman who has really good experience in both the public sector and private sector. In the public sector, he has spent time at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission of Columbus, Ohio. Serves as the MPO for the Columbus, Ohio area. Also, the MPO for the Los Angeles, California area, or my favorite MPO acronym across the nation, which is SCAG, the Southern California Association of Government. He's also worked at the local government level for the city of Pittsburgh. So he brings a lot of experience at the local and regional levels with respect to transportation and planning more comprehensively. And excited to make that announcement more formally in the coming days. Also wanted to introduce Andrew McIntyre. Andrew, raise your hand. He's the newest addition to our MPO team. He's been with us for a couple of weeks now. He comes to us from the Twin Cities area where he was a market research analyst. I think he has already found a really good home within our planning department and has probably already made best friends with those in the research on the research team. So welcome, Andrew, to the team. Looking forward to working with everybody on updating the regional transportation plan over the next year. I know many of you have a lot of local priorities that you want to see represented in that plan. One of the points of emphasis that we're going to be taking with this plan update is to do a better job of positioning, not only documenting the decisions that we're making together about how we anticipate using formula funds from the federal government, but positioning your priorities for additional state and the federal discretionary dollars that are out there. I think we want to make sure we're not leaving money on the table, either by not obligating your current dollars or by not doing enough case making and storytelling to inspire the federal government to invest in Middle Tennessee. So that'll be a point of emphasis as we update that regional transportation plan. And Daniel, unless I've got anything else to share.
I just wanted to thank your local staff as we went through the process of analyzing every TIP project. They were very responsive in telling us what the current status was, maybe upcoming milestones that they were about to hit or delays that they were experiencing. So we had, about a week and a half, 2 weeks to go through that analysis of over 200 TIP projects. And so just wanted to thank your local staff for being responsive and communicative on those updates.
And thanks to the three of you for working extra hours to get that done. So a great job, everyone. Mr. Chair?
Yep. Any other business before we adjourn? Looking for a motion? All right, thank you guys.
Please leave your name chance on the table. I say that every time there's somebody that takes them off with them.